It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Irwin, hello. How are you?
And good morning.
Good morning.
Now, this is a debate that's been going on for, you have an art history background. You probably studied this at some point in your education, but
Oh, no controversy in my
no
art history
yeah,
degree.
yeah, but how could there ever be controversy in art, Esperanza? Right. But we're talking really about public art, that you know, displays of public art,
Does it have a place?
exactly. Esperanza,
There's the question. Who is the ultimate arbiter, right?
yeah, gosh, I was going to say,
Did I take the words right out of your
you
mouth?
did, because I was saying to myself, wow, I'm going to sound so smart saying this. Who is the arbiter of taste? Who is the judge and jury? And Esperanza went and did it, but that's okay. She said it. She said it perfectly, really. So, and again, it's been going on.
You know what they say about opinions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We do keep it clean on Our Hamptons. At least we try to. But again, these examples, Picasso's Guernica was a protest art, and Goya's Disasters of War was protest art. And I remember back in the day, 1999, I researched this to get the exact date because I remembered it. Rudy Giuliani, mayor of New York City at the time, wanted to pull the $7 or $8 million a year funding they gave the Brooklyn Museum of Art because of a controversial art display. And again, it becomes, art is subjective. 2 and 2 is always 4, math, but art is subjective. But we have to bring it locally, because this isn't our New York City podcast. This is Our Hamptons podcast. And in the not too distant past, 1989, according to a New York Times article I found by a Sarah Lyall, the village of East Hampton in the historic district.
The recently created historic district.
Right. Now, this was 1989.
Fairly recent, I think, at that time.
Okay, good. I'm glad you brought that up. They banned outside displays of art within its historic district. Now, you mentioned you weren't sure if it was banned or just needed a design review board thing. I mean, I'm going by what the article said. But the bottom line was Guildhall, which is the heart of arts and culture, arguably, in East Hampton Village, sits on Main Street within this district.
Right. And Guildhall had displays of sculpture. I mean, currently they have one sculpture. I think that ultimately that's what they determined, was that they could always have that one.
Right.
But prior to that, with this historic district creation, I think it was, they had various sculptures displayed in that front lawn area.
Right.
A normal thing for a cultural institution, a museum, if you will.
And it did touch off a pretty big debate at the time. Again, this is going back 1989. I had just moved here. I don't really remember all of these details. You perhaps remember them better than me.
Not at all, because I was really not so much here. I was at school.
That's true. And I mean, it's 1989. Okay, true enough.
I would say, like, about that year or a year later, I interned at Guildhall. So it was, it was not distant in my...
Okay.
It's not that I don't remember. It's just that I wasn't embroiled. I was kind of embroiled in this, but it was
understood.
Kind of like the pumpkins in front of Della Femina's Red Horse Market.
Right.
Remember? It was around the same time.
I remember vividly, and
90s,
Yeah, that was early 90s. which really opened my eyes to the fact that there's really no such thing as bad publicity, because boy, did that generate a lot of, my
Yeah,
gosh.
don't we know that even recently in our town?
True
A certain
that.
place that got painted a certain color.
That's right. I could break into a certain Rolling Stones song, but I won't. Um, but I mean, the artists obviously were up in arms about this. As a matter of fact, quoting a couple of them, and here's a little teaser, Esperanza. Remember these names because there's going to be a reason for them. We're talking about Janet Lair and Ruth Vered. I think she calls herself Vered now only, but
Yes. And the name
um,
of the gallery
r-
was, and to for many years, Vered.
right.
Hmm.
Janet Lair, the co-owner, said this sends a negative message to artists. It says we're afraid of you. We don't trust you. And the next step is maybe we don't want you in our community. And I mean, I sort of take it like that also. And Tony
Hmm. Hmm.
Bullock, who was really sort of a very forward-thinking kind of guy, as supervisor, was very young when he was supervisor here. That I remember,
Uh-huh.
was saying how the government is telling the artists to take their sculptures somewhere else. I mean, artists have been living here since the turn of the century, and they're very much part of the history of this community. I mean,
And there's no doubt of that. Yeah.
I mean, we've spoken about that. I can't tell you how many times on Air Hampton's podcast
Hmm. Hmm.
we preach this.
Yeah. I
So
mean, not, it didn't come with the founding of the community, certainly, but has been a part of this history since the 1800s. So,
completely true. And again, it goes to the whole part of what makes this community what it is. You don't hear controversies like this in bedroom communities of New York City. I mean, it doesn't seem to. But this place has this history, and this is to your point, Esperanza. The officials at the Village Design Review Board, the DRB, set guidelines for this district when it was formed in '86. Yes, it was only a few years earlier. They felt the artists were misinterpreting the decision. The board issued the ban because, listen to this one, its members did not want to continue reviewing each request for an outdoor exhibit and serve as de facto art critics.
and it's a, reasonable position to take. I mean, they're not art critics,
That's uh,
but, taking it to an extreme is not exactly the way to deal with it, right?
and Clayton Moray, who was the board's vice chairman, Esperanza knew him personally.
Right. He was our neighbor.
Right. Said, you might say fine to one artist, no to another, and you create a whole furor. And I
Certainly,
guess,
certainly, yeah. Artists are sensitive souls.
yeah, they're completely very sensitive. We're trying to preserve the character of the historic architecture in this district. If we put a wild piece of modern sculpture outside, it would distract from the historic significance in terms of its architectural viability. Again, I don't want to get bogged down in this, but this is so subjective. Like, I mean, we're now determining what dialogues with what. It just becomes,
Right,
you know,
right. Well, it was a different time, probably more conservative thinking than we would look at it now.
yeah, I would think so. I would think so. Even, even though Tony Bullock was pretty out front with this, but he
But
was a
this is
super,
the village.
that's right. He was a supervisor of the town. Really, when it came to the village, his hands were tied. But again, the issue came up, in the winter of '89 when Guildhall received and then let expire permits to display two outdoor sculptures, one in wood by Albert Price, the other in metal by William King. Joy Gordon, the director of the hall at the time, said people love the struck sculptures. Now, Esperanza, here's a line you liked, I remember. What Ruth Vered said, they weren't nude and they weren't offensive.
Right. I mean, then yeah, who is the judge of what is offensive and what is nudity
Right.
bad? It just,
Yeah. I mean, and
our
again,
Puritan values are just so assaulted by
just really,
sculptures.
and so then, and the board got Robert Heffner, I mean, well respected, terrific historian, for the village. He got involved and he proposed guidelines that would limit size, colors and materials. Pieces were compatible with the historic district. But, again, this really is just prone for a lot of trouble when you start.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something, and let's preface this by saying how I, in particular, and we should all be grateful that there is a historic district that is
Yes.
locally designated and has these protections in place. There is the danger with historic districts of creating guidelines that are too specific and too restrictive. So I think, we're talking here about that exact situation, which, was thought to be reasonable at the time, but, things change. And
Yeah.
in fact, they weren't really reasonable at the time.
Right. No, I mean, again, board did struggle with this decision. Larry Cantwell, later
Mhm.
supervisor of East Hampton, but at that time and a long time was the East Hampton Village administrator, says how the board struggled with this decision. It's not an issue of government against art. The issue is trying to weigh preservation of history against the presentation of art. I mean, I'm telling you, it's so subjective, this stuff. But again, the artist, William de Kooning, Julian Schnabel said, the decision is another example of the village's intolerance toward the artistic community. Again, there's always that classic adversarial.
Well, I mean, there is that, remember Jimmy Ernst, who joked that, people would say, hide the sandwiches, here come the artists,
Right.
we're at a party.
That's very funny.
It was like the scourge. The Vikings, right?
Right.
They pillage
We should
and
give that
plunder.
story. Yeah, Esperanza. That was during the days of Solar when, oh gosh, that was a great term you used to use. I mean, it's
Yeah. Well, the Vikings were not the artists so much as the clientele.
as Esperanza, as you know, my background in art is just extraordinary in terms of my creativity. I can barely write my name, but one year I did actually submit a piece to the Guildhall members show.
You did.
I did, and yes, and believe it or not, I asked you to take a picture of it with me, and we took a picture of it standing in front of this piece.
I'm remembering that.
Yes, and
right.
that piece that I submitted. By the way, ladies and gentlemen of our Hamptons podcast audience, I put a sales price of $40 on it and it didn't sell. But it was, I was really going to donate all of the money to Guildhall because I was that kind of generous guy.
Irwin, in fact, you are truly an artist because that is an artistic act in and of itself.
I mean, it really was when I think back on it. But I named this piece The Opening, Esperanza. And what I did was I took a picture of the food table at Ashwag Hall during an art opening because there wasn't a person in that room looking at the art. But boy, that $8 bottle of wine was going down fast. It was unbelievable. So,
but
I mean, I really did think it was clever, but it was.
I should have bought it.
I
really, maybe. Do you still have it? I will.
I actually still have the piece.
Is it now $100?
It's hanging in my basement. It really is still there. I should find it. When this episode airs, I'm going to post that picture. Although one of the guys in the picture, actually, true story. He said it tongue in cheek, but Benjamin Franklin once said, "Nothing is ever said in jest." He was a lawyer also. And he saw the picture, and it was him from the back. He goes, I could sue you for this. And he said it smiling, winking. It's a guy I knew.
Yeah, ha ha, nudge nudge.
Ha ha ha! I'm telling you, the guy wasn't happy about it. But anyway,
he felt exposed.
Because believe me, he was consuming a lot of that.
But we digress.
We do. That's what we do on our Hamptons podcast, that Esperanza. Moving on. I mean, William King, great sculptor, great artist. East Hampton has an image to uphold, said William King, one of the sculptors whose piece was removed this winter. I happen to like this one. It's prissy and tea roomy.
That's the reputation. Yeah.
Now, if you allow an art center, we're going back to Janet Lair, and we're now going to get to the heart of this matter. If you allow an art center to exist in the middle of your historic district, you have to understand that its purpose is to display art. What are they supposed to do? Sell napkins?
Yeah, some
Okay.
good quips there. Yeah.
Really was. Now we're going to go into, that article was from 1989. We're going to fast forward to a 2011 article by Carrie Ann Salvi. This comes right out of the East Hampton Star. And Esperanza doesn't know this is going to happen. I'm springing this on her right now because I constantly have to prove to Esperanza how my production skills, in this Joe Rogan-esque studio I operate out of is just extraordinary. So, because we are going to get into the 1960s sculpture by Larry Rivers. And to get it going,
and some of the characters are the same.
here we go.
I lost you, Irwin.
Anyway, I tried to do this with we did a little pause, but it didn't work because my production skills aren't that good. We'll have to edit that out. But it was actually a segue of playing Legs by ZZ Top 41 years ago. But it didn't work. That's how
come on, use your editing skills.
Yeah, I'll have to use my editing skills to edit that back in. But the bottom line here was
she's got here, I'll sing it for you. She's got legs.
She knows how to use them. That was better, actually, than the ZZ Top bridge. I actually was trying to get Billy Gibbons in the studio for this. But
picture us with those beards. Just do that.
Funny thing was, the drummer, Frank Beard, didn't have a beard. But anyway, that's another conversation. Yeah, because the two
only
guys,
you would know that.
Oh yeah, it's it's crazy, right? But
Larry Rivers and his 16-foot tall pair of a woman's legs.
Right. Which, by the way, interestingly enough, and you've got to touch on this for a second. These sculptures were actually part of something Larry Rivers and a number of other artists were doing for the Smith Haven Mall up Island.
That's right. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But
so they could have been displayed there, right?
Yeah. I mean,
monumental. They were monumental.
Exactly. And I also read somewhere that, before it was acquired by Janet Lair and Ruth Verrid, it was actually in Larry Rivers' house/studio in Southampton. And visitors had to walk under the legs.
Under the legs.
Yeah. So like it was sort of like
the portal.
Yeah. And it was sort of like, like
even
the liberal, avant-garde art community, there was a certain level of discomfort, almost like walking underneath a ladder.
Perfect. Perfect. Got to make people uncomfortable.
Exactly. But it was really funny when you think about it. But so anyway, this 1960s sculpture was sitting outside the Verrid Lair residence, on Madison and Henry Streets in Sag Harbor Village,
which is a beautiful old church. It was the Baptist church that they converted, and it was their home. A really neat place.
Now, do you remember seeing the sculpture live?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now I'm going to go on record.
I spent some time there.
Yeah, I'm going on record as saying I was a big fan. I thought it was fantastic.
They looked fine to me because they're not, they were not garish in a sense of like colors and things. Right. They kind of the white building of the church with this on the long wall along the side of Henry, I guess it was.
Right.
They just, I don't know. They weren't distracting to me, but that's me. That's just me.
I thought it worked, but the debate was, and this is going to be an ongoing theme we're going to keep talking about, with a leg sculpture. Was it ornament? Was it a structure? Was it temporary? Was it permanent? That was the ongoing argument. The village attorney, also our state assembly representative, Fred W. Thiel, I think he's still the village attorney, said the legs were a structure.
In Sag Harbor? No, he's not.
He doesn't think he is anymore? He was then.
Yeah, no, he's assemblyman. That's it.
He's an assemblyman, yeah, but
Oh, he was then. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. He was
yeah,
he was
yeah.
also a town attorney for East
Right.
Hampton.
He's also a
Yeah.
Southampton town supervisor at one
Oh
point as
yeah.
well, if I recall.
He's terrific. We love you,
Yeah,
Fred.
we love Fred Thiel. Yeah, and but again, he's an attorney. He was interpreting the law as he saw it, and
Right, which is what he's sworn to do, right? I mean,
exactly,
that's people
exactly.
forget this, right? There's a law, and whether you like it or not, you have to uphold the law. And then if you don't like it, then you look for ways to change the law.
There are avenues to do that. That's correct. So, that's really what it was. It was his opinion that the couple needed a building permit to erect the legs, even though the legs were theoretically erected, but they should be subject to architectural and historical review. There were discussions of variances that Verret and Lear could apply for, moving it from the property line, shaving 13 inches of height off of it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah.
And again, Verret, I think it adds character to the town. Doesn't hurt anyone. Village should be proud to have a prominent display of work by Larry Rivers. Lived in Southampton, was buried in Sag Harbor.
Mhm.
Now, this neighbor was pretty reasonable, Christine Bellini at the time. And again, this is a 2011 article. She understands that sculpture violated village zoning code, but I think an exception in this situation can be warranted. People come to Sag Harbor to experience part of the history of modern art that was here in the 50s and 60s. Well, the village is trying to follow the letter of the law, but the Hamptons would not have the prowess it does as a cultural destination without the artwork, Esperanza.
Right. Right.
You know, Barrett agreed, saying even our partner, who was never one to back away from challenges, was hesitant to take on the restoration. As for legs,
Oh,
there
you
are
mean about the
hundreds.
church? So they would so they're talking about the building
Yeah,
because Vered and Lair restored the old church because it had been derelict for a while. So um that's what they're talking about, the restoration project. I just want to
exactly.
be sure we're
Exactly.
clear
But
about that.
pushing the story up a month, the New York Times wrote an article about this in January of 2012. So it was only the following month. Again, talking about the 16-foot tall fiberglass legs, to your point, Esperanza, against the home that used to be the Bethel Baptist Church. And here's, the common, some people love them as the irreverent embodiment of the rare Hamptons village with a sense of humor and values that transcend dollar signs. Was that true in 2012? I don't know. Um, but some people hate them as the embodiment of two cool Manhattanites and art snobs who should have more respect for Sag Harbor's fishing village past.
I have a feeling that, I mean, if you translate, a Bonacker to the, its version in Sag Harbor, I have a feeling those people could care less about these legs.
I second that personally. I really do. We talked about this actually. So, I'm going to take a little poetic license, but when we did the episode on the podcast on the Signa Gallery, it was Manhattanites, it was second homeowners, and it was fishermen and farmers that were at the openings.
Yeah,
Like it was.
it was a mix. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anyone was going to get too. I don't think anyone was going to get insulted. But again, I'm just going by, this writer's, take on it.
No,
You know,
there's something to be said for that,
yeah,
but I think it comes from another place.
yeah. But again, this is now January 2012. This article came out after 2 years of pondering these weighty issues. The village ordered that they be taken down in what they termed a classic East End kerfuffle. See, I like that word, Esperanza.
I love kerfuffle.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
It's like hootenanny.
Can can I, can I make that my new stage name on our Hamptons podcast?
Kerfuffle.
Kerfuffle with Esperanza Leon on our Hamptons podcast. But Janet Lair goes on to say how people love the legs. They've become a local landmark. You want to get to 114, make a left at the legs, right?
I left at the legs. I love it.
Which is true, I guess. I
Yeah.
will take you right to 114. But as for the village, I think it's too much for them to cope with. It's monumental art, something beyond their experience. Sag Harbor considers itself the intellectual village. They're letting people down.
Oh, gee, I think she's going a little too far there with
Well,
Sag Harbor, but yeah, okay.
you know, and again,
There she
legit.
bordered on the too cool Manhattanites.
Yeah, yeah, and then you get into, Fred Thiel again and again, same thing. He reading the letter of the law. And he was village attorney. By the way, in 2012, he was
He was
village attorney
both. Yeah,
as well. And again, it's whether the legs were a structure. I'm not going to belabor this. We've been over it. He's a
right, right.
lawyer reading the letter of the law. A
Under,
structure,
yeah, under the zoning law of the village, he was considering that sculpture a structure. Listen, I had a similar problem when I had my gallery on North Main Street where I wanted to put in, it was a 9-foot sculpture. It was part of a display for an exhibition that was inside, and this sculpture was going to be outside. The sculpture was meant to be like a seat, like a little bench, right? And so it had a footing, concrete footing, and everything put in. But what happened was it was considered by, and my landlords were trying to be very, following the letter of the law. They
right,
went and asked the town, and the town said that was a structure. It couldn't, I would have had to get like gone through a whole review and get a permit for it
right,
because it was over 6 feet.
right,
And
right,
so what I had to do, which was really silly, I really should have just gone to the review, was bury it so that it would be under 6 feet or
right,
no higher than six
right,
feet. And then by bench, you could stand on the seat.
right.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, just crazy stuff, but
So, but it
we
was, I'm just making the point that, it was considered a structure,
right. Point taken, and you're right.
even temporary, whatever you want.
Now, Larry Rivers died in 2002, but the article this is sort of implied. I'm going to take poetic license again and describe Larry Rivers. He was a musician, artist, provocateur, no question. One of the pioneers of pop art, and certainly loved controversy and spats. He probably, had he been alive, would have loved this.
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
no
he
question.
would have loved this. In fact, a little piece of Hampton's folklore, if you will, how Jackson Pollock tried to run over one of his sculptures once.
Really?
I never heard anything about that until doing this research for this article. But you know, that's a pretty cool story. And now again, we're fast forwarding it. We're going to still stay in 2012, and now Barbara Goldsmith wrote an article in the New York Times about how art has legs. I mean, do you believe the life this was given at this era? Like, I mean, the Star was covering it locally. I mean, the New York Times. I mean, this is 3 months in a row of a New York Times story about
It's
this.
pure entertainment.
I mean, my God. And again, Barbara Goldsmith goes on. It's a quintessential example of the centuries old battle. What's art? Who can't? Who can judge the difference?
Right. And that was something that Fred Thiel had said, it's a
Right,
structure, and a structure is a structure is a structure. And he
right,
said, if you exempt it as a piece of art, it puts the village in the position of having to determine what is art. Right. And yeah, it's
about 1,000%. Now, Gail Pickering, who chaired the ZBA, the Zoning Board of Appeals of Sag Harbor at the time, to your point and Fred Thiel's point, this is not a decision about art. It's setting a precedent for building structures. Try to get your head around that bit of specious reasoning, which is the writer of this
writer saying that. Yeah.
Exactly. And again, she goes on. We touched on this earlier throughout history, how self-styled arbiters have taken it upon themselves to decide what can and can't be, cannot be the legitimate purview of art. We touched on Rudy Giuliani, we touched on Guernica, but I like the way she closed this article, Esperanza, how when the Sag Harbor board that decides whether to let Larry Rivers' legs stand in place would be wise to remember what Hippocrates wrote about 400 BC. Life is short, art long. Opportunity fleeting, experience treacherous, judgment difficult.
Words to live by.
I would, I would really say
Art
so.
is long, and so were those legs.
Man. And she knew how to use them. Um, um, Now, I really wasn't even aware of this, but apparently there was a documentary about legs, a big issue in a small town, put together by Beatrice Alder and Jennifer Brook, the filmmakers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I never saw this, I'll confess.
I did not either, but it does ring a bell. I do remember
Yeah,
hearing about
yeah.
it.
It was in 20 film festivals all around the country, felt completely different. But, when she talked about airing it at the Bay Street Theater, part of the Hamptons International Film Festival, she said the crowd, it felt a little different because it was such a local story here,
Right, of course. Yeah.
and
It wouldn't have the same impact or effect on, audiences in, I don't know, Sundance.
exactly. And, they started this film off, and we're not going to get too deep into this, but with the age old, what's a local, which used the 1969 sculpture to kick off the discussion of larger issues. And they interviewed village figures, the publisher of the paper, the mayor at the time, artists,
Yeah, and
whatever.
they both lived and still do, I think, in Sag Harbor. So
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, obviously they began the project by talking to, man, Ruth Verret and Janet Lair getting plenty of play in this podcast today, but this is the heart of the story. And this, the Verret and Lear, this one-time couple wondered whether they were the targets of discrimination. Was it freedom of speech being hijacked with the attack on this sculpture? Like implying were there bigger issues in play rather than just Fred Thiel's a structure is a
yeah,
structure is a
strict
structure.
interpretation of the zoning code. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And, Ms. Brooke writes, everyone seems to have a small town in their experience that gets hung up on seemingly minor issues as a vehicle for acting out their major issues.
Gee, that sounds so familiar.
Doesn't it now?
Oh my gosh.
Everyone's got a story like this, and that's because we're all
Yeah.
humans.
And it's so much easier to get hung up on these minor issues,
Right.
especially when you have major issues that are too difficult to tackle.
Yes.
And so most people then focus on these little ones that they feel they can control somehow and solve.
Esperanza, we're going to close this article. This article. I'm doing well. We're going to close this podcast right now and tie all of this together because I'm going to push the story a little bit further along, 5 years to be exact. So now we're going to go to September of 2021, where the New York Post, of all places, reported that the late artist Larry Rivers' sculpture, Legs, like the dramatic pause at the end here, Esperanza, sold for $100,000 in the first 15 minutes of the Hamptons Fine Art Fair.
And I would say, is that all after all that controversy that they should
Right.
have gone for a lot more?
Yeah, I mean, it's Larry Rivers.
And then I would also add, what a commodity art is. And it all ultimately just comes down to commodity. How sad.
And Larry Rivers, if he would wake up for a couple of minutes, would probably be shaking his head at all of
From
this.
his eternal sleep.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Saying,
Much ado
crazy
about
stuff.
nothing. Yeah.
It's, at the end of the day, it's a sculpture. Right. Or it's a structure. It's a piece of art, but it's a structure. But someone was willing to pay $100,000 for it. Wonder if it's leaning outside of his or her house in whatever part of the world he or she lives.
Yeah, in the middle of the woods somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe they're making people walk underneath.
We should wrap.
I can only hope.
We should also bring up how it was at Longhouse Reserve for a period of time also.
Yes, that's right.
And boy, it wasn't controversial being at Longhouse.
Well, there you go. And there it was art, or was it a structure?
Right. Whatever it was, it fit right into Jack Lenore Larson's master plan. I'll tell you that.
Those 16 acres could take it.
And those legs, they knew how to use it. I gotta tell you, it's quite possible every Instagram post promoting this episode will have that song playing.
We'll have ZZ Top.
Yeah, no question about it.
Yeah.
Esperanza, that was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yes, it was. Thanks for taking me on that journey, Irwin.
We somehow we find these journeys and we just run with it, man.
Yeah. Well, I hope it brings back some memories and also some associations because, these things continue to happen.
No.
I'm thinking about a certain bull.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Welcome to Our Hampton's Overtime. Esperanza's referring to, of course, the bull that was placed at the forefront of Herrick Park.
Yes, charging the middle school.
Exactly. That generated a little bit of controversy, but Esperanza, two people doing this podcast 100 years from now are probably going to be talking about similar issues.
No doubt. No doubt.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks again, Irwin.
Pleasure as always. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.